doing these remake reviews, I've realized that rather than jumping directly into the details and sorting through the exact minutia of why Stage 1 in the remake is different from Stage 1 in the original, and yes, I do think these details matter, but it's also very easy to get lost in them and to lose track of the broader picture, the bigger question, which is, why does this remake exist in the first place? What is its goal? What is it accomplishing? And I've found that the term remake is insanely broad and can encompass all kinds of different projects with all different degrees of validity for existing. And so maybe one remake is totally valid and makes sense, and another remake does not. But if you just put this broad marketing term remake over the top of a project, it seems to be the wider gaming public, at least the critical class of the gaming public, like IGN, just take it for granted that this remake is valid in the first place. And that is why I want to establish an idea that I think we all sort of sense, but I don't think has been formally expressed that I've seen anywhere in game reviews, which is the difference between artistic authority and corporate authority. So artistic authority is, I think, what critics should be interpreting and worrying about, which is the authority of the creator, the artist, viewing the game as a work of art. Because works of art have an author, and that author has an intent and a purpose. And that gets muddled into the corporate structure, the corporate authority world. So this is people who own the IP, the people who own the rights. And what I've noticed a lot, and this is a huge shortcoming in game critique just in general, is that a lot of game critics and a lot of discussion around games just take the corporate authority as equivalent to the artistic authority. I've seen this even on like forums and stuff. It's like, oh, well, Sony owns Demon's Souls legally, so it's their game. So whatever they want to do with it is valid. And that kind of treatment seems to happen with video games a lot, but it doesn't seem to be as widely accepted in other art forms because it doesn't make sense, right? Because that is just treating the game as purely a product. And that is how a lot of game reviews treat remakes. It's like when you go on Amazon and you see the reviews for like a vacuum cleaner, and they're talking about, oh yeah, a great vacuum cleaner with great functionality. Yeah, that's a product review. But games are an art form. They have a different style of review that requires the recognition of the artistic authority. And so with remakes, when I'm analyzing them, I always try to factor in what degree of artistic authority is occurring in this project. So with Shadow of the Ninja Reborn, for example, those are the original creators returning to their game and reinterpreting it in this whole new way. And it's essentially a whole different game in the end. And it even has its own name and title, and it's distinctive. So it's like, all right, there's a lot of artistic authority occurring here. Same thing with the first Resident Evil remake, where Mikami himself was the director, and he was working on his own creation with the team and everything once again. So, okay, there's a lot of artistic authority happening. But with the modern era of remakes, that artistic authority is tenuous at best in a lot of cases. So in the case of Demon's Souls, I think it's the most egregious example possible because they are remaking a game without any involvement from the original studio, from the original creators, and of course, in the corporate world, Fromsoft are not going to come out and just slam the remake. That never happens. But you can definitely tell that there's some serious beef between Sony and Fromsoft, and they weren't thrilled with how Demon's Souls has been treated over the years, and look at what's going on with Bloodborne. And so the reason I think Demon's Souls remake exists is purely corporate. It's purely because Sony has a new console, the PS5. It's kind of struggling a little bit. They need a killer app, as it's called. They need a killer piece of software, as it's referred to, on that PS5 to get people to buy the damn thing. And back on the PS4, FromSoft's Bloodborne was a real prized reason to get a PS4. I've heard many people over the years say, I got a PS4 for Bloodborne. But can they lock in FromSoft to make them a Bloodborne 2 or something for the PS5? Apparently not. And so Sony look at their library, they're like, well, we still own Demon's Souls. So who would be lacking any sort of artistic integrity to come in and feel like they could just remake the game and resell it without the original involvement of Fromsoft themselves? Just get a Western studio. They'll do that shit all day, every day, and here we are. But if you take a step back and just look at Demon's Souls from an artistic lens, not a corporate lens, you would see that a remake makes no sense whatsoever, because everything that you could say a remake would accomplish would be much better served with a very proper remaster. So there are reasons to return to Demon's Souls, but those reasons are to get it on to more modern hardware that's available, because the PS3, I mean, I have a PS3 and I had to literally dust it off just to play Demon's Souls, and it was huffing and puffing in the process, by the way. And also the PS3 doesn't quite have enough of that hardware power for Demon's Souls. There's times where the frame rate chugs and the game logic itself only runs at 30 frames a second. And of course, the online stuff is no longer being actively supported. So there's a ton of valid reasons to return to Demon's Souls and to work on it again. But what is happening, I'm noticing, is that type of work is remastering work. And I do think remastering work is actually a very important field of game design, but it's a very technical field of game design that has to do with creating clarity to the original version of the game. That is what a good remaster is, like a good remaster of an album. Think of Bluepoint as audio engineers and take your favorite album. Just think of your favorite album and then it's getting reissued and it's going to get remastered. What do you want to happen to your favorite album when they do that? What you want is for them to make it clearer. You want the original limitations of whatever recording equipment was involved to be bypassed, and you want it crisp, clean, and insanely accurate remaster of that album. What you don't want to happen, and Albini talked about this,
all of those decisions are the responsibility of the band that I'm working with. Like, should we play it faster? Was that a good take? Do you prefer this guitar sound? Like, things like that. All of those decisions, those would all be the responsibility of the band that I was working with.
Is for the audio engineer to decide, you know what? You know what would be better if I boosted the bass of the album a bit, give it a bit of a bassier feel? Why don't I kind of drop the tempo a bit? And hey, while I'm at it, let's add in cool drum line that wasn't in there before. And all of a sudden, that audio engineer has overstepped his role in creating the clarity and instead is now creating a reinterpretation, but then passing it off as if, no, this is the original album. What are you talking about? It was always like that. That is what this remake culture is. It's a direct conflict between viewing games as an art form and viewing games
as a product.
We've gone well beyond remasters now. They really are true remakes.
And the tone of the reviews of Demon's Souls Remake says a lot. Here's something very interesting that I welcome you all to track, which is if you want to know what IGN really think about like classics and fan favorites, especially if they're a little bit more hardcore, just look at what they say about the remake, because the things that they would not have the balls to say, it comes out in the remake, where in Demon's Souls Remake, they're like, yeah, the original movement of Demon's Souls is janky, and we'll get to that, or this aspect of Resident Evil 4 is janky, but now you've got this new product that everyone can salivate over, then it's totally open license to slam the original masterpiece in favor of this new product. And it would be one thing if these studios were remaking these janky pulp games that were kind of bland or uninspired and trying to inject something more interesting and artistic into them. That's kind of what Quentin Tarantino does with a lot of his work. But they're not. Instead, what they're doing is they're taking all-time masterpieces and thinking, I'm on this level. Yeah, Fromsoft are only the most visionary studio in the past few decades. Everyone looks to Fromsoft for inspiration and guidance, and they are like the breakout studio. And so this studio in Austin, Texas, do you think they really have even the capacity, let alone the artistic authority, to come up with something better than Fromsoft themselves? When you look at it as a work of art, the idea is ridiculous. And as I go through, I'll point out a lot of detailed issues, but even just fundamentally, this project has no valid reason for existing. Instead, what Bluepoint should have done is what they have done in the past, what got them to where they were, which is to take a step back and say, all right, we don't know shit about game design, so we are here as technicians, and we're going to remaster your game and bring the clarity of the vision into a new bit of hardware. That's actually something Westerners tend to be pretty good at. It's a better role for these types of studios. But what has happened, I think, is that the majority of people who get into Western game design are not there to be audio engineers. They don't have this deep passion for preserving and clarifying the original design of the game. No, they want to make their own games. They want to have their own artistic identity, but they don't have the fortitude to try to build up their studio in their own distinctive brand like Fromsoft did, and like, all these games that are getting remade now did. Instead, it's like, well, what we can do is we can leech on to the works of the past and then impose our vision on top of them, and then Western critics will just eat it up because it's catering exactly to this critic base that just views these games as products. And so coming in to Demon's Souls Remake, there's a funny irony because the game presents itself as if it's like very accurate to the original game. That's the sense you get when you look at it on the store page and the way it kind of discusses itself in the marketing. You almost get the feeling that it is something like Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, which is just visuals laying over top the original foundation of Sigma 2. That's a whole other ball of wax. But in the case of Demon's Souls Remake, that is not what is happening. Instead, what they did, and they clarified this, is they took the enemy design and kind of the basic level structure and made something that's kind of approximating Demon's Souls. But I think in the same way that if you go onto YouTube and you look up like Ocarina of Time and Unreal Engine, that's kind of Demon's Souls Remake. It's like, yeah, it's kind of Demon's Souls in some ways, but there's also a lot of places where it isn't remotely accurate, and it's not trying to be. That's the key thing. Here and there, we will decide, no, Fromsoft, this is how it's done. This is how it's properly modernized. And they apply what I like to call the remake sludge. I think this is a fun way to describe it because we're seeing it a lot with these remakes. And what the remake sludge is rather than saying it's slop or these types of terms, I think sludge is the best description because these remakes are not underproduced. That's not how it is. There is a lot of production in these remakes, but it's an overproduction. They are overproducing the game and thinking all of that extra production equals improvement. Just like when I was 12 and I was trying to bake myself a chocolate cake and I was reading the recipe and I thought, 2 cups of sugar? How about 10 cups of sugar? Am I right? I created this over-sweetened, sludgy nightmare. And that is what Demon's Souls Remake is. It's sludgy. For example, let's look at how they decided to apply the 60 FPS to the base movement of the game. So Demon's Souls runs at essentially 30 FPS. It runs at 60, but everything's doubled at 30, right? And so with your movement in Demon's Souls, it's very direct and very snappy. And so when you're maneuvering around things like you're going left to right, the character snaps and maintains the hitbox consistently so that you can create very precise movement. Demon's Souls is a game of precision. Your attacks, the hitboxes, your movement, everything is very based off of this real spacing. Well, as IGN put it, and as I think Bluepoint agrees, that's janky. That's not elegant and refined like modern games. Modern games need to be nice and sludgy. And so what they did is, instead of just adding intermediary frames to make the animations smoother at 60 FPS, but accurate to the original game, instead they thought, no, let's add fancy, elegant, swing around type of maneuvers. Oh, doesn't that look so smooth? Yeah, it looks smooth, but there's a reason why in the original game you pulled back instantly. It's because your hitbox needs to maintain consistency. So with the new animation, when you swing around, your hitbox now lingers for a few frames as you turn around. In most games, this probably wouldn't matter, but in Demon's Souls, every frame counts. Another weird one is when you turn around from standing. In the original, it's just simple and direct. You turn around. But in the remake, you do this weird moonwalk where, yes, your character is moving, but she's facing the wrong direction for a while. I have no idea why they made this shift, and in itself, it's obviously not that big of a deal, but all these types of weird changes make the overall movement, along with some other issues, feel strange and unreliable. And so in the remake, if you're wondering, why am I constantly getting clipped by shit? This could be a reason. Another one that's even more of a problem, and it's not something I've noticed anyone has commented on because it's very hard to prove, but I managed to do it, is they added in some startup inertia to your walk. Not to your run, to your walk. So when you walk, there's this little bit of extra delay stepping time before you get into full speed. What's funny is that IGN themselves seem to have picked up on this, but of course they're like, oh yeah, this is so great. The problem with that, it's a massive gameplay problem, is because Demon's Souls is based around your walk speed. You use your walk speed to create fundamental spacing, and it's also super important because walk does not require stamina. And so the entire boss and level and enemy design is all balanced on top of the walk speed. And the walk speed is what I call direct input. And great action games use this. Devil May Cry 3, all the great action games use direct input because that creates precision in your input. But when you add in this little bit of inertia to the startup, makes your inputs feel sludgy. It's a little bit off, and you have to readjust your entire way you play your game just around this little bit of inertia. Does it break the game? No, obviously it doesn't break the game, but it definitely throws off the feel, and it also heavily incentivizes rolling because, ironically, I think Bluepoint seemed to think that the base balance point of Demon's Souls is your roll, not your walk speed, because they nerfed your walk speed and they buffed your roll by giving you this omnidirectional roll. So for example, in a lot of fights with really precise movement and spacing, like the Flame Lurker fight, instead of running up, slashing him, and then moving back, saving the stamina, instead you end up, because of that delay, getting clipped a lot by his jab, because that jab startup and attack is based around your original movement speed, not your nerfed inertia. So you'll get clipped by that all the time, and so you create the habit of attack, roll out. You use the roll to bypass the inertia. So in the original Demon's Souls, your roll is like a tactical move that you employ when absolutely necessary, but you try to avoid using it, save up your stamina, and also just have the frame advantage of not being in roll recovery. Where in the remake, you're just rolling like Sonic the Hedgehog because you need it in often cases just to build up your base speed again. And if you're a newer player or a player who hasn't really figured out the spacing of the bosses, that feels better to you because you're naturally going to panic roll anyway. But in terms of the core design of the game, it reduces down the granularity and depth of the real spacing into a binary of to roll or not to roll. And now let's talk about the accuracy of the gameplay itself, especially the hitboxes. Because when you go back and you see the developer interview, they seem to separate out hitboxes from the core design of the game. This is a real problem with modern Western developers, I'm noticing.
We try and identify, as Alexis said, the core, the soul of the game, and that is what we keep. They sit their engine over the top of the existing engine and strip away everything apart from what we identify as that core or the soul, which for Demon's Souls is the AI and the gameplay. And then we build everything back on top of that. So the collision, the camera, obviously the graphical elements, the sound is built over the top.
And so you'll notice here that Bluepoint separates out the hitboxes, aka collision, from the quote-unquote gameplay. And he describes exactly that he thinks that the hitboxes and collisions can just be plugged in over the top of the core gameplay. Think about this in any other action genre. Would that make sense at all? Let me just quickly swap out the hitboxes of Street Fighter 2 and preserve the gameplay of it. And so clearly there have been a bunch of adjustments to hitboxes everywhere, and it's very hard to exactly pinpoint a lot of them, but some of them are super obvious. The Flame Lurker ground pound, I knew that was going to get nerfed. I'm like, there's no way a modern developer is going to allow this hitbox. They're going to nerf it, and they did. The ground pound on the Flame Lurker, whether due to the modeling or whatever is going on, is significantly less amazing and insane as the hitboxes in the original version. And also, even if the developer decided, okay, we're going to remake the graphics, but try to maintain the hitboxes, redoing the graphics themselves is just going to make that such a challenging undertaking. That's why you can't just take this, oh, there's the game layer, and then there's a graphic layer, and they're just like modular. Okay, you can just separate out all of the 3D modeling, all of the character scaling. You can separate all that out, stick a whole new set of them in, and then one-to-one plug them in like a USB cable. That's not the way it works. So hitboxes are core to a game's identity. They are very important, and they are not nearly as accurate in this version as people seem to think. And I don't think they could be, even if they really, really tried, but I don't think they really, really tried all that much. And then the camera system. To reiterate my views on camera systems, I view the camera as much of a gameplay mechanic as everything else.
And strip away a camera,
including its limitations. I am not of the school of thought with game design that every game needs to be RTS top-down maximum visibility. The fact that the camera is pulled in on a character in a game is what creates a lot of its identity. Think of God Hand. A lot of God Hand's identity is the fact that that camera is right on your back. Same thing with Resident Evil 4. The placement of the camera creates a lot of the dynamics of the game design. And yes, there is a skill in gaming of being able to be spatially aware of what's happening off camera. And if you don't believe me, just think of a first-person shooter. Part of your skill in FPS is not only knowing how to hit stuff that is in front of you, but also knowing what is happening around you outside of your vision. If you took a game like Devil Daggers and you zoomed the camera out from a first-person perspective and put it top down, I think we all would realize that's a different game. That's a different whole meta there because you can see what's behind you. I think that is the same thing in third-person camera systems. It's just third-person camera systems are a little bit more ambiguous on where this balancing point is, and so they tend to be more contentious. But in my opinion, the original Demon's Souls camera system is excellent. It is actually one of my favorite in third-person games because it is consistent and it is stoic. I talked about in my original review the stoicism of Demon's Souls. The camera system of that game is a perfect example of this. It doesn't attribute any sort of meaning to anything. It's just looking, and you just point it and it just stays. So what you can do, and I really love this in Demon Souls, is you route your camera angle. So you're like, okay, I'm coming into this room, there's a spiral staircase, I will turn the camera here, and it will just stay, and then I'll go up the stairs, and then I can know how it's going to track as I go up those stairs. There are some areas where it's a little bit like, okay, Fromsoft, like in the Flame Lurker fight, sometimes a pillar will be in front of it. So all you'd have to do in these types of situations, there's not a ton of them, but you just like put a little transparency effect or something so you can kind of see what's behind that pillar. But I'm also kind of more open-minded to the idea that things getting in front of the camera in a third-person game is a little bit more valid than in something like a 2D game, because in 2D games, it's just fixed. There's nothing you can do about it. But in 3D games, you actually control the camera, so you could just place the camera so that it wouldn't be in front of the pillar. I think there's a whole conversation that is not happening around camera in the way it's a mechanic versus just all players, all times expecting the camera to just look exactly where they want to look subconsciously. And modern developers have really taken up this mantra of camera design because that is exactly how the camera in Demon Souls Remake is. It is constantly like trying to control where you look, and it'll just turn all of a sudden. So you'll be going this way, especially if you played a lot of the original. All right, I've got my camera route. I'm ready. I go here, turn it, here, turn it. We've got it routed. You go, and the camera's just like always subtly sort of shifting and moving. It's like drunk. And yes, I am aware that there are various camera settings that you can go in and change. And in the interview, the director said, oh yeah, if you go in and change these settings, you'll go back to the original camera. No way, that's not remotely accurate. Because I think they hard programmed the camera just to do things in certain sections, and it will do them no matter what camera settings you apply. For example, if you come to a lot of bridges and a lot of like scenic areas, Bluepoint, again, they're going for this like Hollywood presentation of the game. They even add like a lightning bolt hitting a tree for some reason. They're all about trying to make this game like, oh, so epic. And so whenever you come into a scenic type of area, the camera's like, nope, it's time to pan now. It's time to go Peter Jackson mode and like pan along the bridge. But the thing about it is Demon Souls, at least for me, is not a game that you just play one time and you go, oh my God, the bridge, so scenic, so beautiful. Not if you're playing the game for a no-death run and it's your 12th attempt. I want to focus on my route. I want to focus on where I'm going. And also that's cutting against, I think, the original artistic visual theming of Demon Souls, which is that stoicism. The game is very neutral. It doesn't tell you this scenery is sick and it's beautiful. You just decide it is or it isn't. The game doesn't care how you feel about how it looks. It just looks awesome consistently all the time. But that's up to you to interpret. But in modern gaming, everything's heavy-handed. So, of course, you come to a bridge.
Epic camera angle.
And it just really takes you out of the immersion of the game. That's what's kind of funny and ironic, I'm realizing, is that I think we have a complete reverse opinion of how immersion works in game design, where I think the Fromsoft approach to immersion is a much more effective, where it's like neutral. And so you are interpreting everything that's happening. You're controlling and interpreting what you're seeing, how you're feeling about it. So one guy may feel one way about the bridge. The other guy may not think about that bridge once in his life. Whereas with modern games, they're trying to force immersion, pushing things on the player, but that actually breaks immersion because now I can feel the claws of Bluepoint just grabbing the camera. I can feel the hand of the developer, and it breaks the experience. I'm like, what the So there's all these times constantly in the remake where the camera just decides, I'm going to do this and check this out. And so there's another huge differentiation point between the original and the remake that's subtle, but very important to recognize. Another remake hallmark that's really starting to annoy me is this game's UI design and this standardization of UI we're seeing across AAA games now, where there seems to be some sort of industry understanding that UIs should be as unaesthetic as possible. They should just be barren and function, function, function. Well, let us not forget that the UI is part of the aesthetic presentation of a video game. And once upon a time, developers understood this. Look at the UI of Ninja Gaiden 2. Look at the UI of Guilty Gear XX. Look how beautiful the elements are. Same thing with Demon's Souls. Yes, it's minimalistic, but there's these nice aesthetic touches. In the remake, this looks like placeholder. And a fan of the channel pointed out to me that with these modern studios, the people working on the UI are some sort of UI specialist team that have no direct connection with the game's art design, and clearly have no direction with the game's gameplay elements, because let us not forget, in the original Demon's Souls, when you pause the menu, it's still active gameplay. And so you need to be able to see what is going on when you're pausing, whether you're getting items, whether you're changing weapons. You need to be able to see what is happening. In the remake, they didn't get the memo, and the screen covers the entire gameplay field when you're using the UI. How did they oversee something this simple? And so the UI of this remake, not only is it aggressively generic, but it also misses the baseline feature of allowing you to use the menus while in active gameplay situations. And then finally, I want to talk about the graphical presentation of the game itself. The main reason you're buying, right, is to get those sick Bluepoint graphics that old Fromsoft, they're just too outdated to measure up against. In a vacuum, I find that notion ridiculous, because if you look at who is doing the greatest visual design and presentation right now, Fromsoft, if they're not at the top, they are in top contention. They are just on another level compared to most other developers, and only really the top tier of developers are playing at their level in terms of visual design and presentation. And so if you wanted Demon's Souls Remake, and you wanted Demon's Souls to have like really top-notch graphical overhaul, of course the obvious person you would want to involve is Fromsoft themselves. But what's kind of funny and ironic is I'm sure Fromsoft, they're working on new things, they're actively creating things. They don't have the time and resources to go back and remake stuff they've already made before, right? They're still an actively working developer. And so you need to pull in this second string developer to attempt to try to improve the original art design of probably one of the most talented art design teams in gaming. Does that make a lot of sense? Is that a good idea? They're just not on the level. Let's just be honest. Even if it were valid that they attempt to remake these graphics, they don't have the talent to back it up. They don't have the vision to back it up. And so what you end up getting with the visual overhaul, so to say, of Demon's Souls is a very generic Western-looking game. And the music is also very generic and forgettable. It has none of that like meme factor of like the original, like the Tower Knight theme. Iconic. It's a little silly, but also it's super iconic. And yeah, the Fromsoft music's always really interesting and distinctive. All this stuff is bland, generic. The visual presentation of the game, especially as you play it more and the whole novelty factor starts to wear off, to me, I always find myself thinking it looks like Sid Meier's Pirates or like Pirates of the Caribbean. And it has this like Disney look to it that I do not like at all. Everything's soft and kind of fleshy, which is fine in most cases, but Demon's Souls, that's not the art direction. Demon's Souls is bleak and brooding, but not in this generic way. That's what I love about it. But of course, they make everything as generic as possible. So for example, the Storm King fight. In the original, it's kind of almost serene and peaceful, but also kind of creepy. But it definitely has a really cool visual flair to it. Well, in the remake, of course, where they're like, well, let's make it all stormy and there's lightning. And then you need to hear the sound effect of when you hit the Storm King in the remake, because it sounds like you're fighting a dolphin or like a blue whale. It sounds so stupid. The original game, yes, he had like a scream when you hit him, but in the remake, it sounds ridiculous. And of course, our boy, the Flame Lurker, where in the original is a very distinctive design that stands out in your memory as that is the Flame Lurker from Demon's Souls. Whereas in the remake, it's the Balrog from Lord of the Rings. Just copy and paste. See, with art direction, you should be trying to make the characters more unique and individual to the game, not more generic and pop culture references. And of course, in terms of designing his lair, it can't be this natural rock formation from the original. It's got to be a standard combat arena because that's where the Flame Lurker lives. He lives in a combat arena, just waiting for you to show up. Isn't that neat? Then there's the prison, the towers, the swamp, all of the darker areas of the original game. Those have this great kind of color design to them where you just naturally feel the color. Like when you go into the prison and onto the towers, you feel that dark green that evokes death and decay. There's like kind of this afterlife Greek type of thing happening. But in the remake, it's all just very generic and spooky. We saw this in Resident Evil 4 Remake as well. All of these more subtle artistic decisions that are made in the visual designs of these games always get just ran through the overproduction sludge, and then they just become, ooh, spooky and all that kind of stuff. So those areas really stood out to me as a massive downgrade. Another detail is when you fight the Tower Knight, you get the feeling that he's some sort of mechanized thing that you're fighting. There's magical elements obviously happening, but there's also mechanisms, because when you slash his ankles, this spray like oil comes out, and you even hear like the steam of the oil coming out, and you think, oh, okay, there's like this technology and magic happening here, and it gives this Tower Knight like this cool sort of distinctive identity. But in the remake, they decide, yeah, let's have blue flames come out. First of all, it doesn't signify damage nearly as much as the steam and the oil flying out. But also, then you're wondering, right, what's inside that Tower Knight? I'm talking visual design, not lore. We're talking just visually. When you're looking at that Tower Knight and he's got blue flames coming out of his feet, it's just magic. It's a magic giant knight now. When he slams his things on the ground, instead of having like just a shockwave come out, that makes sense. You got flames that appear. So he's just magic. There's all kinds of things like this across the game that irk me. Obviously, people won't care as much here and there, but again, just an example of them overproducing it, because they could just be like, all right, let's keep the original concept here. These remakes, they think they're adding in all these extra production values, but often what they're doing is they're just screwing with the established visual design of the game. Another one is in the mine level where you have to go down these platforms. They've decided these walls look a little bare and boring, right? There's just this flat wall. Let's add in like visual stuff here. That way it doesn't look so flat and boring. Well, there's a reason why the wall in the original is flat and boring. It's because you want it to be flat so you can hug against it as you come down the platforms. It's a way to route a very consistent platform drop. So I'm playing the remake, going on my usual route, and I just fly off the side of the wall. And if this was some kind of like high level thing that they were constantly doing, like slightly subverting some of the expectations of the way the original game worked and stuff, I would almost kind of respect that. But that's not what's happening. It's just pure chaos. It's pure randomness. They're just putting things here and there, and whether or not they affect the balance of the game, I don't think they tested or worried all that much about. So they've made all of these subtle changes that just aren't quite accurate to the original game, but they don't have a cohesive vision. That's the difference. The original game, how that wall is shaped, that was the vision of Fromsoft. And I trust there was a good amount of like thought and structure around this, because the level design of Demon's Souls is so well done. Obviously, they thought about a lot of this stuff. They thought about the construction of this level. There's no doubt about it. Bluepoint, they're just adding things, throwing things in, and it doesn't amount into some sort of cohesive different version of Demon Souls that has unique identity. It's just an inaccurate recreation. That's all it is. And so that's what you end up with. You end up with a situation where people talking about Demon Souls Remake, the attitude is basically, close enough. If it was just some random lame game, whatever. But it's an all-time masterpiece that has such a massive legacy on gaming. You think it would be treated with...
That's the story of my life. No respect, no respect, no respect.
I guess because Demon Souls is stuck on the PS3, and because Demon Souls did not have that worldwide explosion of success that Dark Souls did, that it's kind of treated as, oh yeah, that's like the prototype of Dark Souls. That is not at all a fair representation of Demon Souls. Like, it is an insanely polished, well-made game, even in its own right. And I think the way Sony have treated the game over the years has been, I don't know what the obligations of a publisher are. If the game is wanted, clearly, you need to keep it available in some fashion that is also respectful to its original version. Otherwise, you're just actually suppressing a work of art. And that is what is happening with Demon Souls Remake. This remake is suppressing the original version of the game because you can't play the original version of the game anywhere else. There's no PS4 version. There's no PS5 version. There's just this lame remake by Bluepoint suddenly taking on the mantle of they think they know game design now to be making changes to a game of such high caliber as Demon Souls. So, do I like the remake? No, I actively dislike this remake. It's obnoxious that now if you try to see anything about Demon Souls, it's just completely swarmed over by the remake because no one can get a hold of the original game. The emulation is a godsend, and shout-outs to the emulator for keeping this game preserved in a sense, but the vast majority of players out there aren't really in touch with how to use emulators, and the PS3 emulator is not exactly the most user-friendly anyway, and has pretty high system requirements, and so this is a situation where clearly Bluepoint should have just remastered Demon Souls. But in today's meta, in terms of game creation and publishing, these studios don't want to just remaster a game because that's a limited amount of work. There's only so much to do there, and then you're done, and that's that. And you can't sell it for $70 and say it's a whole new experience and blah, 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 blah. Whereas if you remake the game, even if you have no business doing it...
we've gone well beyond remasters now. They really are true remakes.
Now you've gotten yourself a whole lot more production budget. You've got a whole new avenue of selling the game commercially, and that's why this is happening. It's just gangbusters in terms of business and absolute shit in terms of artistic credibility. And one last note on the business and production side of things. I understand that a studio like Bluepoint would want to do more work than just straight up remastering something like Demon Souls. But rather than doing this whole unnecessary, pointless model of throwing away the core design of the game to add in an inferior interpretation of it, why don't you go back to the tried and true method that we used to get with something like Ninja Gaiden Black, where you get the version of the game that's faithful, but then you have in these extra modes and features and content like the missions, because ironically, once you get through Demon Souls Remake and you get to the end, you're like, okay, that's it? I mean, I just paid $70 for a inferior version of Demon Souls and there's literally nothing else? You don't have a mission mode or extra shit? So I think resources would have been much better spent building extra stuff on top of a faithful creation of the game, like Metal Gear Subsistence VR missions, than just doing a fan remake of a masterpiece. And so if you enjoyed this review, definitely check out my review of the original game, which I think is a masterpiece, and that's not a term that I use lightly here on the channel. I've fallen in love with this thing. It'll be interesting to see how the rest of the Souls series stacks up to it, because I'm a huge fan of Demon Souls. And if you can, please like, subscribe, tell all your friends, and support me on Patreon. I'm a full-time YouTuber, so Patreon is how this all happens. No Patreon, no channel, and I've got lots of cool exclusive stuff on there. Thanks so much. Adios, everyone. So thank you to the $5 and $8 patrons: 100, Absconditis, Accepting Panda, Anhold, AJA, AJD578, Alistair Stevenson, Alberto Starna, Alex, Alexander Pfeiffer, AMH, Anthony A, Arvin Gordon, Arcade Hell, Arrow Viper, Au Li, Autoname, Battle Mode, Bo, Ben Foster, Benjamin Shabalski, Vito Dames, Bog Hog, Board Bismati, Borky22, Brokeface, Brent Cox, Brian Lucy, Captain Rhodes, Chase Palumbo, Chaflip, Kristen Sopal, Christopher R, Chronic Burnout 3, Kipolino, Clairvoyant Bongwater, Claircliff, Clay Binkley, Jaime Coyote, Post, Concreted, Cooksan666, Cook Some Soup, Corio, Crew Expendable, CSP 3900, Des Audio, Dan Matei, Danchi, Darren Griffin, Dat Guy, David Algis, David Crespo, Did I Done, Demian Smirnov, Desolus, Dimension Diver, Dio Domke, DJ420 Praise It, Drano, Dr. Bosky, Duckies, Eduardo Quinta, Edvard, Elvin Senisev, Elias Alonso, Epson Eagle, Eric Shrivner, Eric Houdini, Esteban Luzama, Explosive General Games, Fabio Picci, Falcus, Fenich, Fiskin, Five Side, Florida Sucks, Forbidden Dave, Frames Per Human, Francisco, Freckle Lord, Full Set, Game Soup, Game Boy Guru, Gelhoff, Gojira Green, GPM, Gustavo Sanchez, Hawk Hans Kowalski, Hero Death, Holy, Han Harthy, HUD, Humongous, J-Dab, Jake Ryan, Jack Walsh, Jacob Grossman, Jacob Valenzuela, Jay McCarthy, J67, J-Lab, JBRPG, Jink Hans, JMD, John Kelly, John Longwalker, John Simpson, John Slaylise, Jorge Figueroa, Josaka, Josh Mayer, Julian Elwood, Jurgen, K, K2, Kane Evans, Ken10082, Kill All Music, Contain, Praise the Boys, Kai Arts, Leonardo McCoy, Ludwa, Alberta, Lord Harrington, Luna Lilich, LZR Tutor, Macabre Monster, Mad Combaticus, Malaise, Maplewood, Mario Simic, Mark Mann, Mason Polar, Master Zeon, Matt O'Leary, Matthew Woodford, Maz, Minong, Meister, Mewjam, Michael De Polito, Michael Faircloth, Michael McCord, Mig ZVM, Mike Mel, Milo Shamel, Mr. Mamma Mia, Mitwid, M. Kusanagi, Morog, Monroe, Munsta Zero, Miles P, Michigan, Naps91, Queen Charlene, Nathan Grimm, Nathaniel Davis, NCR Trooper Scout, Nico Perro, Neon Dagger Games, Nervous J, Nogden, Okla Kugels, Oleg Tolmatisev, Oregano Dog, Panzer Dragoon Should Have Been Arcade, Patrick Basteman, Paul Jablonski, Paul Osterman, Powell Parole, Peace, Pedro Montoya, Pedro Isiles, Philip Plus, PLP, Poor Little Pigeon, Poorly Written Protagonist, PRK, Psycho Blizzard, Hulan Jaeger, R2 Sinus, Ralph Trujillo, Randoom, Raoul VP, Repeato, RC, Realskeen, Rentholtz Time, Retrojet, Retro Man, Retro Masters, Retro Schmupper, Riff Mason, Rip the Jacker, Robert Chang, Rory Starks, Rolf015, Salmon Connections, Sam, Sanivo, Scanline City, Scott Ernicus, Segfault, Shader Bunny, Shazzy, Shmup Junkie, Seropong, Social Kid, Spiders STG, Spongy, Steady AI, Steplable, Steve Fiction, Street Magic, Superfunk, Swoop, Synthmilk, Tamzarian, Taze Ryu, Thana Oat, The Boot Rex, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, Tom McCarthy, Tim French, TK Productions, Travis Arbon, Tristan, Sugumo, Turam, 2IU, Twest Please, Twilight EX, Tyler Olu, Ursua, Ushimushi, Video Game Enjoyer, Beautiful, Vulgarity, Wabby Legs, What Is This, Yellow Tello, Your Nerdy Joe, Yusef Khaled, Zachary Patton, Zach, Zeal, Zinryoku, Zingus.